But people do that sort of thing, and they just get into things. You know, people that come from an alcoholic background marry an alcoholic. You go, why? And then once the person overcomes the addiction, they move on. They have to find somebody else with the same problem. Why? You know, it doesn't make any sense. But if you wait upon the Lord, and if you just look at, I think we have a book that Ken Graves wrote that basically is for young people, and actually deals with finding out what God wants for you first before you start looking for a mate. Because whoever you're going to marry has to be compatible with the role God has for you in life. Because if you're called to missions and your wife doesn't want to leave mom, your mission is going to be 3 blocks around your mother-in-law's house. That isn't going to work. So you have to find somebody that is like-minded, because he says he created this woman to be a helpmeet. That means that person has to be in agreement with you on your goals in life. And all too often we see people get married and they sort of stumble around for 20, 25 years, raising kids and whatever, and they really never have that bond between them. So when the kids are gone, the marriage breaks down because they've never decided what they wanted to do in life. What is the marriage all about? Was it just to have kids? Was it just to share the rent? What's the purpose for getting married? So if you first find out what God wants for you, then you allow God to bring the person into your life, and you invite God to the wedding, because if God's not in the wedding, it's not going to last. So in today's society, we've drifted away from teaching that marriage, the seriousness of marriage at all. We take it so lightly that God's not even consulted in the process. We get calls regularly where people want either rent the church or have me marry them that have no church background at all. I say, okay, fine, you're going to do 5 counseling sessions, then I never hear from them again. Because obviously they don't want to do that. They've already made up their mind they're going to get married no matter what. Their parents are against it, and they're still going to go ahead and do it. They have no idea how they're going to survive. I was talking to a teacher a couple of weeks ago, and her daughter and her prospective son-in-law just getting out of college. They're going to move to California, and they're going to somehow, he's going to go on to graduate school, and they're going to make it. They don't have 2 nickels to rub together. They've got student loans. They're going to move to California, one of the most expensive places in the country. Who's going to help them? Their parents? You know, that's what they're thinking. And worse yet, what's happening, the number of couples now that are just living together, and it's fine if they live together and don't have children, but you got people that have 2 and 3 kids together and still haven't gotten married. Yeah, at what point do you think you've got a commitment? At what point are you convinced that, you know, this really is the right person for you? You know, does it take 20 years, 30 years, or what? You know, but that's where we've gone. We've so broken down the role of marriage in our society that people think you can either take it or leave it. And they think somehow if they don't get married, it won't be the disaster of divorce. But it is. It's exactly the same hurt when people break a relationship as it does when they get divorced. The divorce is simple. They just grant it right away. But all the difficulties you go through of division of property, custody of children, visitation rights, all that occurs if you have those things. Whether or not you got the, quote, piece of paper, the argument they used to make in the 60s and 70s, well, a piece of paper doesn't make a marriage. No, but it represents a commitment, and they don't have that. So now we've got people having like 40% of the kids are being born out of wedlock. You've got celebrities that refer to the person as their fiancé they've already had 2 kids with. At what point does the engagement end and marriage begin? So we've lost the whole sense of family values, which brings us to why we're in John today in chapter 2 of the Gospel of John, and he has his first miracle, which occurs at a wedding. And why? Because what's the first thing God created? Create a marriage. What's the first miracle he's going to do? It's at a wedding. And why? Because again, he's honoring marriage. So if you turn to John chapter 2, it says, on the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. So it's the first thing they tell us, that his mother's there. But the next thing says, now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. So it's interesting. You just gathered these guys in chapter 1, and the whole 6 of them with Jesus were invited to the wedding. That's sort of, well, we know most of these people from the same area. Remember, they all knew each other. Even though they didn't call the others to Jesus, they were from the same town. So all these people are in the same community. God has them all present for this wedding. In verse 3 comes this interesting thing. It says, and when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Now you probably wonder, why did she notice this particular thing? We don't want to cast aspersions on Mary, but, you know, what if they were out of salad instead? But, you know, she calls to his attention that they're out of wine. And okay, so Why is this particular thing so important to Mary? Well, the marriage situation back then, we think marriage is expensive now. Marriages back then, you entertained all the guests for a whole week. You provided the wedding garment for the people. So now you just rent tuxedos for the groomsmen and the groom. You notice they rent them for the guys, but the girls all get to buy them. You already know you're in trouble. Men should recognize there's a problem right there. When a wedding starts, she gets to spend money and buy things, you get to rent things. But that's the way it starts, okay? But they had to provide garments for all the guests. If somebody couldn't afford the right clothes to come to a wedding, you had to do that too. Because remember, Jesus has that parable, but he goes out and invites everybody in because the people who were invited don't show up. And the one guy who shows up doesn't have a wedding garment, and he casts them out. Because the wedding garment there represented salvation. But you had to provide the garments, you had to provide meals for the entire week, you had to provide everything, which obviously included the wine. So it would be an embarrassment to the father of the groom, in this case, because it used to be the father of the groom, not the father of the bride, that actually ran the wedding. And it would be an embarrassment to the family if they ran out of anything, if they couldn't meet all those needs. So in this case, it's the wine, which was sort of, okay, why is wine significant here? Because ultimately, what is it going to be? The wine is going to represent Jesus' blood. The wine is used in sacrifices. So this is the particular event, the particular thing that has called to his attention. His statement to his mother, at times, it almost sounds being disrespectful. Because verse 4 says, Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour is not yet come." So wait a minute. Is he being disrespectful? No, what he's really saying is, he's challenging, why is she bringing this to his attention? He's actually asking about her faith. Because he's really saying, why should you bring this to my attention and not someone else's? What are you looking at as far as what you expect me to do? So it's not being disrespectful. He's actually questioning her faith and her knowledge of who he really is, which is asking, bring the concern to him. It's sort of patterning for us intercessory prayer. We bring needs to the attention of God and leave it there. Because her response isn't, why don't you make the water into wine? That'd be really nice. I had a Catholic chaplain in Hawaii who was teaching this particular thing, and he said, and so Jesus created the first six-pack because he didn't want to embarrass his mother. That's actually true. There were 6 water jugs, and it was supersized. So it's the first six-pack and a large. But she didn't tell him what to do. Contrary to what this false theology of Mary being the intercessor for us has taught, she did not indicate what she wanted done at all. She turned to the stewards and says, whatever he says to you, do it. So what she's modeling for us is you bring a concern to God, you allow God to deal with it. You don't suggest to God or tell God what should be done. So Mary has no intercessory power with God any more than you do. She just called a need to his attention, and then he dealt with it. And now he says, my hour is not yet. He's referring to the fact that being declared Messiah isn't going to happen until Palm Sunday. So this phrase, we see it here, we'll see it over and over again. When he heals somebody, he says, do not tell anyone, my time has not yet come. When his brothers ask him to go up for the Feast of Tabernacles, he says, do not, your time is now, in other words, in order to become a believer, but my time is not yet. Because all he's doing is focusing on Palm Sunday, a day prophesied way back in Daniel, that on that day he would come riding on a donkey, and they would declare who he is. He would be coming, bringing salvation on that day. So he's referring to that when he uses that particular phrase. So underline the fact that Mary did not answer Jesus at all. She recognized who he was, recognized the authority he had, and left it up to him as to how he would deal with the situation. She didn't know what he was going to do. She just said to the stewards, whatever he tells you, do, which is a great instruction for us, really, realistically. Because what we do, we submit to the authority of God whenever we have a situation, and we have to recognize that he's Lord of all or not Lord at all. We don't just bring him specific things and ask him to deal with this particular problem.